Hello, everyone. I would like to welcome you on behalf of CRDCN, to the 7th webinar in our series with the Journal of Canadian Public Policy. I will start by acknowledging that McMaster University, the host institution for CRDCN, is located on the traditional territories of the Mississauga and Haudenosaunee nations, and within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. We begin this session by giving honor and thanks to the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations, and to recognize our responsibility as guests to respect and honor the intimate relationship Indigenous peoples have to this land. We are going to use the Q&A function during this session for asking questions, and we will take questions after each presenter, directly following their presentation. To begin, I will hand things over to Dr. Michael Veal, CPP editor, to welcome our speakers.
Thank you very much. So my introduction will be very brief. Both of these papers have appeared in the journal Canadian Public Policy, Analyse de Politique, of which I am editor. And I want to give as much time for the speakers as possible, so I will go straight to introducing Antoine Genest-Grégoire. And his paper is entitled, What Proportion of Tax Returns Could the Canada Revenue Agency Complete? So please go ahead, Antoine.
Thank you. I will just pull up my slides. All right. As mentioned, my name is Antoine Genest-Grégoire. I'm from Université de Sherbrooke. This is a paper I co-wrote with 3 colleagues from Carleton University, Jennifer Robson, Saul, Schwartz, and Josh Dadjo. And as Dr. Veal mentioned, was published in Canadian Public Policy, Volume 30, number 3. Before I begin the presentation per se, I must mention that our work was supported by a host of public institutions, which we thank greatly for their support. I must also mention that this work was done in one of the Canadian Research Data Centers. These centers are supported also by a host of funding institutions, which we thank deeply, and also that anything and everything I will say is my opinion and that of my co-authors, and not those of the network, the Quebec subnetwork, or any of the funding partners. That being said, I'm going to try to give you a bit of a background of about how we got to trying to research that question of the how many returns could be automated or filed by the CRA. So essentially, I joined Drs. Robson and Schwartz, who are professors at Carleton, who are already working on non-filing for quite some time. They had a paper in also in Canadian Public Policy, I believe, in 2020, assessing the share of non-filers in Canada, which can reach as high as 12% among working age adults. So that's a fairly large number of people who just don't file a tax return. Well, I mean, people are not obligated to file tax returns in Canada, but it does matter for social protection, because all of the programs that we have that are income mean tested are assessed on the income that appears on your notice of assessment after you filed your taxes. So if you don't file your taxes, there's no proof of your level of income, and you're almost by definition ineligible for anything that is means tested. And that's all of the federal or provincial income support program, but also housing, childcare, education programs that are that depend on your level of income. So that's kind of a big. Those 12% are a big issue. After I joined the team, there was a paper by Laurent and Dehir from the CDI Institute, which tried to simulate the share of Canadians that had simple returns using Statistics Canada's SPSDM. That is the social policy. It's essentially a simulation model based on synthetic data. We thought that paper was interesting, but obviously, because it's based on synthetic data, and it's not one of the first uses that were thought of by the creators of that model, we thought, what if we try something similar, but with actual tax data? That is administrative data, the actual tax returns that people file. So the data set is the Longitudinal Administrative Data Bank. I believe I'm our two papers are going to use that. So hopefully I don't say things that Gillian will say are not true. So the LAD is built on top of the T1FF, which is essentially all personal tax returns. These are T1s, and it's a family file. So we also have people who did not file, but some employer had income tax withheld for them in a T4. And then you also have children. So we have an administrative file that links individuals with their T1s and their children. So overall, this family file covers 96% of the Canadian population. And the LAD is a 20% sample of that family file. So that's about 8 million observations per year. You get everything that's on a T1. So any and all, slips that you can add to your tax return, they exist in the LAD. We aggregate the data at the family level. I will expand on that pretty soon. And this is data that is only accessible as part within an RDC. So this is not public use data for obvious reasons. This is fairly sensitive data on individuals. There's somewhat personal information in a tax return, so this is a protected data set. So the questions we ask ourselves with that data, which I was already using for other purposes as part of my thesis, was what share of families have returned that the CRA could prepare with the information it already has. So what share of returns are actually simple enough that the CRA could probably send you a letter saying, this is all the information we have on you. Is this accurate? Yes, thank you. You have filed your tax return. See you next year. And for all the people who do not have returns that are as simple as that, what's complicated about their return? What do they have that makes those returns not automatable or pre-fileable? So we're looking at the distribution of complexity, the depth of complexity, and essentially trying to locate the main sources of complexity in the returns of Canadian families. For our purpose, we define simple returns this way. There are other definitions. This one is the one we use. So we consider a return to be simple if it only contains income reported by third parties. So those would be wages, RRSP income, social assistance. So these are all sources of income that you receive as an individual, but the person that sends you the income also sends notice to the CRA. So it's third party reported. And we only include credits or deductions that can be considered to be automatic. So these would be credits and deductions that do not depend on you making a decision. They only depend on your situation, your level of income, the number of children you have, your age, your province of residence. These are things that once the CRA has that basic information on you, they can just allocate the credit or deduction. They don't need you to tell them about something that you did. So you have the GST credit, the age credit, age amount, pension amount, climate incentives, which have changed name recently, and that's opposite things such as the first-time home buyer credit. That one the CRA does not know whether you bought a house this year or not. So so in that case, that would make your return not simple because that's an piece of information you have to provide the CRA in order for them to know that that you're eligible for the credit. We do it at the family level. So essentially, we're saying a family has simple returns if everyone in the family has a simple return. The logic behind that is that a lot of those credits are based on family income. So to assess whether your credit is simple or not, you usually need to know the other members of your family usually need to have filed as well. And if their returns are not simple, then yours in some ways can't really be simple. You're waiting on someone who has a complex return. So we take the conservative view, and a family has a simple returns if everyone has a simple return in that family. So if you look at the statistics on those families with those simple returns, you can see that it's about 29% of all families in the LAD in 2019 that have simple returns. So that's about 5 million families. These families are slightly smaller than the overall families in the LAD. They have slightly lower odds of having minor children, but really the biggest difference is that on average their income is much lower. It's on average half of what you get for the average family in the LAD, which has $88,000 of total income. And probably logically, you get a much higher share of such families that have social assistance as their main source of income, contrary to overall families. So it's in many ways a story about lower income families. And you can see it here. These dots are income ventiles. So in each dot, you have 5% of the families ordered by income. So in the first dot, you have the 5% of the poorest families in Canada, and on average, their total income adjusted for family size is just $1,600. So this is fairly low. And you see that those families have more than 80% of them have very simple returns. Everyone in the family has simple returns. And then as you move across the ventiles, you see that the share of simple returns drops. It drops very fast around the fourth and fifth ventiles, and then it drops below 50%. And when you're at the top of the income distribution, no one has simple returns. Very, very, very few people still have income returns without any complicated credit or deduction or source of income. This tells you, complexity at first glance is most likely concentrated at higher levels of income. In the middle, but mostly at higher levels of income. People at the bottom of the income scale already have fairly simple returns. If we're trying to see where that complexity comes, on the top left, you have the number of sources of complexity. Anything in the return that precludes the CRA from pre-filing your return or automated your return. You get my 29% of earlier. 29% of families have nothing complicated about their return. 26% have one thing, one credit, one deduction that makes their return complex. 20% of families have two, 11% of families have three. And if we're trying to see where that comes from, you can see at the bottom left that it's not from deductions. 80% of all families have just no deductions other than the fully automated ones. 68% of families have no complex source of income. But then it's with the credits that you get the issue. You only have 30% of families that have no complicated credits. So credits are a big source of the complexity that we see in the tax returns, much more so than deductions or sources of income. Which credits that is? If you look at the top most common source of complexity, top one is eligible medical expenses, which is a credit. So 42% of families have claimed that credit. And then you get donations, 29% of families, self-employment, 16% of families, capital gains, which we've talked a lot about in the last few months, which is 12%, and then tuition and education tax credit, which is 10%. This is overall, so this is just the raw presence of such credits, but obviously a family can have, as I've shown, 2, 3, 4 sources of complexity. So with the large sample that we have in the lab, we were able to get the most common combinations of such credits or deductions or sources of income. So the top 16 is at the top you have medical expenses alone. So you have 11% of families that have they only have medical expenses, and that is responsible. That's the only thing that makes their returns somewhat complicated. And then you have charitable donations and medical expenses. That's 5% of families. Self-employed donations only 4%. Self-employment only 3%. And if you go down that list beyond the top 16 I'm showing you here, what you see is that it's mostly combinations of a top 5, that is medical expenses, charitable donations, self-employment, tuition, you have childcare expenses, and that's pretty much what dominates the top of the chart. So a host of credits, one deduction, and one source of income. If we could find a way to simplify the reporting of those, a huge chunk of the complexity in our tax system would just fade away. It's not easy to solve the complexity of those things, especially medical expenses. That credit serves an important purpose. We have quite a lot of medical expenses that are not covered by either private or public insurance plans, so that credit serves a purpose, but it creates important reporting requirements. So what does this have in terms of policy implications is that, as I mentioned, there are a few credits that are responsible for most of the complexity. So if you're a tax reformer, policymaker invested in simplifying the tax code, these should be at the top of your list. The second thing is, as we've seen first, tax agency reconciliation, where you get the information that you need to pre-fill tax returns from other public benefit offering agencies, would mostly benefit families at the bottom of the income scale. So having any form of pre-filled, automated, or reconciled form of tax filing would benefit mostly, would be very progressive, if you want, would benefit mostly people at the bottom. And obviously that matters for access to social protection, because these are the people who we target with our programs and our policy in many cases. And that's really a big issue, because what we know right now from the CRA's own results is that there's a fairly large number of tax filers who pay to have their taxes filed, and these having their taxes filed is their gateway to social protection. So here you have, it's a different definition of a simple return as the CRA's definition, but you can see that about 66% of all returns that the CRA receives are simple by its own definition, which is a bit larger than ours. And of those, 50% are filed using e-filed outside of CVITP. That means someone paid. Someone paid to have that return filed, either with software or with the help of a professional preparer. And if you go to people who have returns under $25,000, people at the bottom of the income scale, you get 56% of those people who have simple returns and pay to have someone file it for them. So essentially, we're having overall that 17% of all of our taxpayers who are mostly likely eligible for support and have to pay a private preparer or a private software company to access social protection, which is obviously a problem in terms of public policy. So, you know, this is kind of the main endpoint, is that there are strong reasons to want to go towards some form of automation, because right now there's a pretty substantial barrier to access to social programs for Canadians at the bottom of the income scale. So CRA can already prepare a lot of returns. It should probably not wait for all families to have simple returns, because that's probably not within our reach, because many of the credits we have constituencies that want to keep them, and some of them are very useful. We do not have to wait for that to start the process of making tax filing simpler. One of the easy thing we could do is separate asking for a credit from the rest of the tax filing process. So again, in my example where the CRA communicates with you and tells you, hello, this is the information we already have on you, rather than just say, is it good or not, they could say, do you have medical expenses? Have you made any donations this year? Only give us this information, and then you've centered the complexity on just those two things. People provide you with the numbers, and then their tax return is done. So that's one of the easy things we could do to make tax filing much simpler. And we have pilots underway from CRA and Revenu Québec about doing something like that. These are welcome signs, but they were announced in budget 2023, and we still haven't seen anything on either the Quebec or the federal front. So the clock is ticking. We should be seeing the beginning of actual pilots, and then perhaps results, which we can look at as researchers trying to make better policy. So that's it for my presentation. Hope I good
So
on
thank you,
time.
Antoine. That was great. I'm just going to go to the question and answers that are already here. The first one is from Marwa Al-Fakri. Thanks for your presentation, Antoine. Really interesting work. Can you speak to any limitations of this paper? Any challenges you faced in identifying simple returns?
Well, the obvious challenge when studying non-filing is that we have fairly little information. So it's telling us something about the returns that we do see and what we could do to make those returns simpler. But it's not, sadly, it's not telling us anything about the people who do not file, that do not appear in the T1FF. So we're still trying to do some work to see what the specific obstacles for those people are. Obviously, cost probably matters, but it's most likely not the only thing. You can think about things such as literacy, numeracy, mastery of either of the official languages. So these are also obstacles that we suspect matter, but we could not assess in a project such as this one.
Thank you. I'm just indicating that anyone who wants to put a question in the question and answer, go ahead. We've got a couple more. What about family size reports and child tax credits? Doesn't that need to be confirmed? I.e., do you need to confirm the number of kids, the parent marital status, and tax returns? It seems it would change from year to year.
Yes, it's something that you need to have, but it's usually something that does not change that much from year to year, and also something that the CRA could get from other places. But that is also, yes, one of the things that you would probably need to confirm, perhaps not every year, but a couple of times over the years. If your situation changes within a year, there's very little way for the CRA to know super fast. That's why you have the obligation to report it to the CRA, and that's probably not something that we can easily change. Provinces probably have a better grasp on those things, but CRA has some form of communication with provincial agencies, but it's really not fully integrated. So that would be a challenge as well. Yes.
Alex McClellan writes, very interesting work, Antoine. Are you aware of any reasons why the CRA hasn't moved to automation yet? So expand a little on what you were saying just at the end there.
I mean, I don't think it's extremely easy. I think they might face asymmetrical incentives in that sense that failures in a system such as those will be very salient versus the diffuse and small benefit, but to millions of Canadians. So that's something that happens with every public program. I think being risk averse, much more than willing to give small benefit, but to a lot of people. That's typical in public programs. In that one, it is a fairly important issue. There's confidential information involved in that. So CRA can contact you and tell you this is the info we have, but there has to be some form of control in there. So I think that's probably what, from the administrative side, probably stalls them. And then on the political side of it, this is obviously not great for the tax preparing industry, especially the software part of it. So I'm guessing there's some pressure. I mean, they did form an association just a couple of years ago, and it's one of their stated goals to shut this down. So I'm guessing that probably counts somewhere in the mix as well.
Alexandra Marin asks, why do you consider the age credit as an automatic credit when taxpayers have the option to transfer this credit to their spouse? Are you suggesting that the CRA should choose how the taxpayer should use the credit?
That's a good question. We've talked about there's actually transfer is possible in many places in the Canadian tax system. As long as the amount does not change that much, it's not that much of an issue. That's like an added choice. One of the ways we could do that is probably ask people, what do you want to do as a default, and then just keep on doing that across time. When we're evaluating at the family level, obviously it does not change much of a thing. We've talked a lot about in our own discussion, working on the paper, about the tuition one. And probably one of the solutions would be to have default rules that are maximize the return, obviously, but also perhaps maximize, try to keep as much of the credit in the hands of the person that is eligible to it to maximize autonomy. So we could have default rules in place for such transfer of credits, and then have an option for people to allocate it differently. The main idea is that you want to be automated first, and then you want to switch the default so that people who want something slightly different can ask for it, but that they don't need to vet the thing for the credit to exist or happen in the first place.
All right. Anna first asks whether we can share the PowerPoint. So I believe we do share the PowerPoints online here. I also note that we will have the whole talk on our YouTube channel. But Anna also asks, thank you, Antoine, for your great work. I have a question on one of your slides on the simple return. You list 3 items. Could you explain more on the 3rd item on your slide on family level? What kind of expenses could be under that? So the family level, you've got the right slide there, good. Simple return, family level, just expand a little on that, I think is the question.
Yeah, it's just the criteria that we use. We use the criteria of, and anyone who has a complex return as a family makes that family complex. So that's what I said when we took the conservative view, is that we could do the same analysis at the individual level, but we believe there are more than a few people who have simple returns, but who are perhaps partnered with someone who has a complex return. And if anything in either of those tax returns require you to provide information from the other return, then the complexity of your partner makes your return complex, essentially. So that's the view that we took for analysis, is to say, well, complexity contaminates in the family. Anyone who has a complex return in a family makes that family have a complex return. And that's just because our system, though it is individual, at the start, there are quite a lot of places where it's family integrated. So family integration is itself a form of complexity, as the other person asking a question raised. So that's why there are no you can't ask a credit as a family, but there are a lot of credits for which only one member of a family can ask it, and it's assessed on the family's total net income. So those are the kind of things that we have in mind, and for that we believe that anyone who has anything complicated will make everything complicated to some extent for tax filing in that family. So that's really our thinking in with that mention of what makes simple. It's simple at the family level that we study.
Okay, I have 2 more questions on the list. We'll try to get them in, but I think then we'll have to go to our next talk. I'm not going to do them in the same order. I'm going to do the last one first. In Ontario, rent paid contributes to the amount of trillium benefit a person with a low income would receive through tax filing. And then this would change from year to year. So I guess the question is, how are you going to deal with the provincial level benefits like the trillium benefit?
I'm no expert on Ontario credits, but as far as I know, we have something similar in Quebec, and there was an obligation that was created for landlords to produce a third party report of actual rent paid. So that would be the obvious way. For all of those things, the obvious way is to ask a third party to report something. It's not doable everywhere. It's much harder for medical expenses, but for rent, it's fairly easy to say, well, you had someone rent an apartment from you over the year. You have to file this slip to the CRA, and then the CRA can match it to you at when they do that in Quebec. They know whether you received the housing component of the equivalent of the trillium. That would be my option for that.
Okay, and then this is the last one we're going to do, but I noticed we've accumulated a couple of questions. Maybe you'll be able to answer them in the question and answer by typing. I'm not sure.
Sure.
But right now, let's conclude with this question. Can Canada and the CRA learn from other countries and tax agencies that already have automatic tax filing?
Yes, obviously there are places that do a better job than us. It relies in part on having better information systems. Some places do better than us because they just have fewer credits and deductions. That would be great, but that's an avenue that's harder to pursue. But just having a better information systems, trying not to add more complexity to the system, and starting to build some kind of mechanism for the people who we can target now, and then bring in more people in as we expand the thing is probably the way to go. That's kind of the experience of Spain, where the government had government-sponsored tax software, and from then they were able to build some form of pre-automated filing on top of that. So it's an incremental process, but we need to start the process for it to get somewhere. That's really, I think, the lesson we want to convey.
So thank you very much, Antoine. That was great. And as I say, there are still some questions there in the question and answer that maybe you can take a look at. But now we'll turn to our second talk. It actually also appears in the September issue this year of Canadian Public Policy Analyse de Politique. And it's right after Antoine, the author by the article by Antoine and his co-authors. And that's the the 50th volume of the journal because we're proud of this. This is our 50th anniversary volume this year. And anyway, that paper is by Anna Cameron, Gillian Petit, and Lindsay Teds, and it's entitled "A Basic Income for Nunavut, Addressing Poverty in Canada's North." And fortunately, we have Gillian Petit here with us, and please, Gillian, go ahead with your talk. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Michael. So as stated, I'll be sharing today our results from our paper called "A Basic Income for Nunavut, Addressing Poverty in Canada's North." This is co-authored by myself and Dr. Lindsay Teds and Anna Cameron, and we're all over at the Department of Economics in the University of Calgary. So some motivation behind this paper to start. In 2020, the government of Nunavut announced it was going to conduct a basic income feasibility study. Now to that date, a basic income actually hadn't been studied for Nunavut. And a large reason for this is because there was a data issue. A lot of the basic income literature in Canada is simulated using the Social Policy Simulation Database and Model, the SPSDM. The SPSDM doesn't have information for people living in the territory, so Nunavut's often left out of those, or is always left out of those simulations, I should say. So this paper addresses that gap. So Nunavut is a unique jurisdiction to study a basic income. So 84% of the population in Nunavut is Inuit, so they're First Nations, they're Indigenous. And Nunavut also has a very high low income rate compared to the rest of Canada. So they have a low income rate of 29%. This was in 2019 compared to about 10% in Canada. And as well, children in Nunavut have a very high low income rate of 35%. This is compared to about 9% in the rest in Canada. It's very high low income rates. There's also a very high percentage of the population who receives territorial income assistance. So 27% of people in the territory receive income assistance, and this is the highest anywhere in Canada. Some of this stems from limited wage employment opportunities and skill mismatches. So there's very limited wage employment opportunities, and often the Inuit population may not have the skills to be able to take advantage of those opportunities, or actually may live in locations where those employment opportunities aren't necessarily available. More importantly, though, there's a historical and continuing legacy of colonization policies in the territory. So this includes relocation. The Inuit were relocated to their current settlements in the 1950s. They were relocated by the federal government. This was followed by a residential and day school system, as well as the killing of the sled dogs in the 1970s that really jeopardized the Inuits' economic activities. So in this paper, what we do is we use administrative tax filer data, so the T1 family file, to simulate basic income designs for Nunavut. We identify both feasible and optimal basic income designs for Nunavut, and then we discuss the potential for basic income to address poverty in Nunavut. So really quickly, our basic income designs, we tested 4 different basic income designs. The first one here is a universal basic income, so a UBI for working age adults. With the UBI, everyone gets, every adult gets a check in the mail. So for the individual UBI, so UBII, every individual gets an amount G. So let's say G is $1,000. You get $1,000 in the mail in your bank account. For the family UBI, in this one, we actually scale that check by the number of adults in the family. So if our basic income amount is $1,000 and you're a single adult, if we have the UBIF, you get $1,000. If you live in a couple, each person in the couple would get $707 because we're going to scale by the square root of 2 divided by 2. So each person gets $707, and then the couple itself will receive combined $1,414. We also ran a UBI with a child top-up just because of the really high child low income rates in the territory. So for the child top-up, what we do is we take the working age adult UBI and add to it a child top-up of $2,100 multiplied by the number of children. This number, 2,100, was chosen because there's a seniors benefit in the territory of that same amount. We also tested income-tested basic incomes. Our first one is an income-tested basic income, or IBI, for working age adults. So again, there's an individual one and a family one. For the individual one, we take that basic income amount of G, and then we scale it by the phase-out rate, or the benefit reduction rate, BRR, multiplied by the individual's income. For the family income-tested basic income, we again take that basic income, we scale it by the benefit reduction rate multiplied by the family income, and then we also scale it again by the number of adults in the family. So the square root of n divided by n. The income that we use, the income concept that we scale it by, is adjusted net family income. This is because we use this concept because fairly well all credits or all refundable credits in Canada use this concept of income. So we're just kind of sticking with what we see already in the tax system, except that we subtract out any social assistance income that might be in there. And this is because we think, or we believe, that if a basic income was to be implemented, it would actually replace income assistance. Okay. And then finally, we have an income-tested basic income with a child top-up. Again, for these, the child top-up, so you would get the adult income-tested basic income plus the child basic income. The child basic income is $2,100 multiplied by the number of children. And again, it's scaled out by the benefit reduction rate times by either the individual's income or the family income, depending on whether we're looking at the individual IBI or the family IBI. So the output we measure is the cost, and we also measure the resulting low income rate that would happen if we had this basic income. In Canada, the official low income line is the market basket measure, but there's no MBM for Nunavut, or at least at the time of this writing. So what we did is there was a preliminary draft measure of the MBM for Nunavut, and we used that, but we actually omitted the shelter component of that measure just due to high housing subsidization rates in the territory. So over 60% of everyone living in the territory lives in subsidized housing. So we did minus that shelter component out of this preliminary draft measure. All right, so again, the data that we used is we used the T1 family file. So that includes the T1 tax filing information for all individuals filing their taxes in the territories. It includes basic demographics, sex and age, as well as their fiscal and census family formations. So what in the sample we use is we're gonna only keep tax filers ages 18 to 64 who are resident in Nunavut for tax filing purposes in 2019. And then we also keep in our sample some people under the age of 18 or over the age of 65, but only if they have dependent children, because in this case, they won't get the working age adult basic income, but they would be eligible for the child basic income. So overall, we got just over 20,000 tax filers in our sample. And for this particular sample, our low income rate using our low income measures was about 40%. Okay, so here's some results. These are our simulation results. So what I'm going to show you now is a series of graphs. And in the left-hand side graph, on the x-axis, you have the benefit amount of the basic income. And that black dotted line, that's a basic income of $2,400. So that's the amount that the CERB was that people often talk about, just as a point of reference. And then on the x-axis for the left-hand side graph, we see the reduction in the low income rate that's a result of these basic incomes. And then if you look at the right-hand side graph, the y-axis is actually the gross cost. So in this particular graph, I'm showing you the universal basic income simulation results. The maroon line is the individual UBI with the child top-up. The pink line is the individual UBI with no child top-up. The green line is the family UBI with the child top-up, and the blue line is the family UBI with no child top-up. So basically what we're seeing in this graph is that a universal basic income can significantly reduce the low income rate. So if you had a universal basic income of $60,000, regardless of which, whether you use individual or family or with or without child top-up, pretty much you can reduce the low income rate by almost 100%. However, these are also the most costly basic incomes. Comes without saying, right? So I'm going to scroll through some graphs now. The next graph, what I'm going to show you is the income tested basic income with a 15% clawback rate. We go again, show you again, from the UBI to an IBI with a 15% clawback. We see that moving down this way, if we have that 15% clawback, the reduction in the low income rate is slightly less for basic incomes of the same amount, but it also costs significantly less. So as soon as we introduce that phase out rate, our basic incomes cost less. So here's the income tested basic income with a 30% clawback rate, and then the 50% clawback rate, and then finally the 75% clawback rate. These basic incomes reduce the low income rate by the least, but they also cost the least, right? These are very, I guess, common sense results, nothing new and interesting here, right? So this is what we expect to see. So next, what we looked at then is what basic income design in Nunavut is feasible. What could the government afford? So we looked at their budget. So in budget 2019, we're going to focus on 2019 because this is the year we simulated the basic income for. It's pre-COVID. In 2019, the government of Nunavut only received 6.3% of all of its revenue from taxes and any type of tax. 6.3%. That is very low. And this signifies that the government of Nunavut doesn't have much of a tax base or tax revenue to work with here in financing a basic income. Most of the government of Nunavut's revenue come from federal transfers. So 80% of their revenue is from federal transfers. All right. So when we're thinking about how we're going to finance our basic income for Nunavut, we did using the LAD, the longitudinal administrative database that Antoine explained so nicely here. We estimated the savings that would result if we removed all non-refundable and refundable Nunavut tax credits. The government of Nunavut would save $15.8 million if they did this. Further, if they got rid of the income assistance payments, but not the structure, so we're going to keep the structure, and I'll explain that later. But if they got rid of the payments, because they're going to replace those with a basic income, they'd save $53.5 million. So in total, we think that they have maybe a budget of about $69.3 million to work with in financing a basic income. So looking within that budget, we identified a range of feasible basic incomes, and they range from everything from a $1,000 family UBI all the way up to a $15,000 family income tested basic income with kind of the 75% phase out. So looking at our range of feasible basic incomes, we then identified the optimal basic income. So this is the basic income that's feasible. So it's within our budget set, and it reduces the low income rate by the most. Okay. So our optimal basic income was a $10,000 income tested basic income with a child top up of $2,100 and a phase out rate of 75%. Okay. I want to stress how high this phase out rate is. So when we talk often about, welfare walls, how, as people earn more money, they have to pay more taxes and get less benefits. This is a huge welfare wall in this case. All right, but regardless of that, we next looked at how a basic income can affect poverty. So in general, we looked at some pros. A basic income can reduce the low income rate. We've shown that. It's an improvement over the stigmatizing and paternalistic and very administratively heavy income assistance. So there are benefits from a basic income. We just also want to discuss some drawbacks. The problem with this feasible and optimal basic income we identified is that it's actually that benefit rate is lower than the current income assistance benefits rates in the territory. So while a basic income would reach more people, if people had to switch, the people that are going to switch from IA to a basic income might have a lower benefit level. So they're going to be worse off. A basic income does worsen access to income in real time. Basic incomes are done through tax filing. You have to file your taxes. You need a basic income in February, but you haven't filed taxes. depending on how they structure it, you might be waiting till next April, right? So regardless, we think that you might have to maintain some form of income assistance, some type of hardship assistance, creating a dual system to make sure that people can have access to money in real time, to what they need in real time. You have to file taxes for a basic income. We just saw a presentation on taxes. The non-filing rate in Nunavut is the highest in Canada. It's around 30%. So somehow we've also got to have people file their taxes in Nunavut. And finally, these basic incomes that we looked at don't necessarily address heterogeneity of need. So it does. We often know that people with disabilities have higher needs, have higher need of income. So these basic incomes don't necessarily look at that. So if you wanted to address a heterogeneity of need, you'd need something on top of these as well. Lastly, we looked at a basic income and poverty through an Inuit lens. So we drew on the Kegi model as conveyed by Genest-Grégoire, and it reflects the insights and wisdom of an Inuk elder regarding the interconnectedness and basis of Inuit well-being. And there's three principles that I'm going to go through. So the first principle is living or being together in kinship. This principle embodies peoplehood, collectivity, or people-to-peopleness. Hold on. I missed the slide. Sorry, we're starting with this one. Our first principle is always having meat. This addresses material well-being, livelihood, or productivity, and it's your ability to be self-reliant and provide for oneself. So a basic income, we think, can, to a degree, meet this principle. It would improve food insecurity in the territory. Food insecurity is very high in Nunavut. More income means lower food insecurity. A basic income could improve harvesting opportunities. It aids with cost and time. However, on the flip side, we do know while it aids with all of these, it's not going to solve these problems. This is because a lot of these food costs are very high. The costs associated with harvesting and hunting are very high in the territory. They're higher than the basic income amounts we've looked at. And we also note that regardless of what happens, governments will have to continue to be involved in housing because of the high cost of building and maintaining housing in Nunavut. Okay, next slide. Living together or being together in kinship. So this principle embodies peoplehood, collectivity, or people-to-peopleness, and it talks about healthy and responsible family and kinship relationships. In our view, the basic income approach isn't necessarily aligned with being together in human kinship. This is because a basic income is a very individualistic approach. It focuses on what the individual needs as opposed to what the community needs. There is no evidence that a cash transfer increases or changes volunteering in either direction. So basic income may be in tension with this. Our last principle that we looked at is personhood or individual well-being. So this is having a good personal well-being, good character or basis for life, and it's what makes a person whole and balanced. We know that the rates of suicide, domestic violence, and incarceration are very high in Nunavut compared to, well, the rest of Canada. They're just very high. To the extent that these social ills are driven by income insecurity and material conditions, material deprivation, a basic income could address this principle and these issues. But to the extent that these issues are driven by social distress, a lack of community or culture, processes of colonization and intergenerational trauma, these issues will remain a problem that a basic income on its own won't be able to solve. So in conclusion, a range of basic incomes for Nunavut is feasible. Any larger basic incomes would require additional funding. A basic income in Nunavut could improve low income rates and would be an improvement over income assistance. But just noting it's not a magic bullet that's going to eliminate poverty. There's going to be gaps and issues that remain that are going to require to be addressed. All right. That is all I have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Gillian. That was excellent. I am seeing or reminding people that they can put questions in the Q&A. Since I don't see any questions right now, I'm going to start out with asking you about the relationship of income support and the harvest. do you see, as it seemed to be implied in your presentation, that a role of basic income is to provide the capital needs for harvest, or is that going to need to be some sort of separate approach?
So the cost of harvesting the capital need cost of harvesting in Nunavut are very high. To get a snowmobile is extremely expensive because they've got to ship it up there, right, on the big ships. It can't just be flown in. So I think that more still needs to be needed. And there are currently hunter programs in the territory that address capital needs of hunting. A basic income could maybe address the time issues related with hunting. So what we heard is that people often have to balance going to work and making a wage in the labor market with their hunting and harvesting activities. And it's a hard trade-off to make. So it could potentially free up time to engage in hunting and harvesting activities, but it won't necessarily cover all these capital costs. These hunter-gatherer programs need to continue to be in place to help cover those.
So you also raise an issue that I think is generic to this discussion of basic income, applies in other contexts in Canada as well, and that is the issue of a kind of a trade-off that if you're going to use basic income as a replacement for income assistance, then there are going to be people who lose because they would have received more under the former programs of income assistance that they receive under the current system. As you say, at some level, it is for each society to decide whether that's a choice that they want to make. But I just wondered whether you wanted to say anything more about that trade-off.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think that trade-off, it's going to depend which jurisdiction you're looking at. So Nunavut's income assistance rates are actually very high. They actually, although their basic income assistance rate is high, they actually cover the actual cost of housing and utilities, which are actually the biggest components of their income assistance program. You know, you get down to Alberta and Ontario, where our income assistance benefits are very, very low, too low, one would think. A basic income of a significant amount might actually be an improvement over those benefits. So I think it's going to depend jurisdiction to jurisdiction, and it's going to depend on the design of the basic income that's being proposed anywhere. So like with the Nunavut one, we're looking at a government of Nunavut funded basic income, because that's what they were asking about, right? So a federal basic income could look different, or a basic income funded by a provincial government that maybe has more funding could look significantly different.
So Antoine's sent a question, but he's actually put it in the chat, but I'm able to read the chat too. So there we go. What does the difference in levels of poverty reduction between family or individual program setups tell us about the nature of poverty in Nunavut? And then he has a subsequent question, so we might as well put them all together. Are these results different than we see in other parts of Canada? So I think basically the idea is to distinguish Nunavut from the rest of Canada, and in particular, the difference between family and individual programs.
Yeah, so Nunavut's population structure is interesting. Nunavut actually has one of the youngest populations in all of Canada. And not only that, they've got some of the biggest family sizes in terms of children. It's a very, very young population. And that's why I think we see such high children poverty rates. We're talking about like the average size of a family in Nunavut, I believe it's 5 or 6 people. Sorry, I don't have the numbers in front of me. There's significantly less seniors in Nunavut compared to the rest of Canada. So really it's just attached to these, I guess, younger looking families compared to the rest of Canada.
So Antoine's question actually prompts a question for me. One of the things that was interesting about your results is that the one that you chose as optimal was an individual basic income as opposed to something more on a family unit basis. That means that you're using your headcount low income measure as just number of people. And maybe people would think about it differently if they knew whether some of the people that are being affected one way or the other are children. Have you thought about using other measures of low incomeness that may be focused more on children?
We didn't look at it for this paper, and I don't actually have the numbers available, but that's a good point. It's not something I have available, but yeah, absolutely. Right, if we looked at it outside of our sample, outside of just our sample, and brought in back the children and seniors.
All right. So thank you very much, Gillian. I think we will go to conclusion now. I want to thank both you and Antoine for your excellent presentations. They were really good, really interesting. Both had interesting uses of the kind of tax data that is used in research data centers across Canada. That is the so-called LAD, or Longitudinal Administrative Data Bank. So that was an interesting point. And I am moving on. I think Joanne has her hand up, and perhaps Joanne is going to say something, or go ahead, Joanne.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I did want to say something. Thank you. I wanted to thank our speakers for presenting their work. Thank you very much. Very interesting. But I also wanted to say thank you to you, Mike Veal, in your capacity as editor for the journal. We started this series probably 3 years ago now. It's because you were receptive to the idea, and the sessions have gone very well. Researchers have been pleased with them, our audiences have been pleased with them. So I just wanted to say a thank you to you in your capacity as an editor of the journal.
Well, thank you very much. Joanne is the research director of the Canadian Research Data Center Network, which of course is the sponsor of this particular seminars. And again, thank you to our speakers, and I will pass it over to Tess.
I think that is everything. You have it covered. So yeah, thank you again, everyone, for coming. Thank you to our speakers, our moderator, and Joanne for chiming in there. And this will be posted on our YouTube in the coming weeks.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.